All right, so we're just going to go over a quick overview of the coronavirus updates for the macro exam, and then we're going to also do a video for the micro exam. So here's all the information that the College Board has put out. So these are the links that I sent you on the remind yesterday. So some key highlights, a lot of this stuff you should be aware of already. Like, you're taking the test on May 21st. Duh. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Cool? Cool. So pretty much just like all of your other tests on the exam day, there's a link in your e-ticket that you'll get 30 minutes before the start of the exam. You're going to fill out your information, blah, blah, blah. So I sent you that link earlier this week, so you can get a feel for like how the login process will be. And you probably did that for your other teachers as well. So please make sure you have done that if you haven't done that already. Once the exam starts, they're going to give you the first question right away. They tell you here a little bit about the timer, that your timer is going to show 30 minutes. You should take 25 minutes to read the question and then work out your responses on your scrap paper. So from what I can see so far on this test, and I'll show you an example in a few minutes, is that it's almost like you're getting a watered down version of the FRQ sets that we have been working on over the past couple weeks as part of our normal, course assignments. So while you don't have to submit graphs, you do have to submit explanations of the graphs and models. I know some students were concerned about how thorough that your responses have to be, and as you can see when we go over the questions, really not that thorough at all. So once you make your sketches of the models, you're pretty much just going to explain the effects of the changes that you had worked out in your on your scrap paper. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. So your timer is going to show 30 minutes. You take 25 minutes to read the question, you work on your responses, and then once you work out your responses, I guess that counts as your reading time, you'll have 5 minutes to submit your response. When the timer gets to 5 minutes, an alert's going to show. You stop working at that time, begin to submit your response. Once your response to question 1 has been submitted, you can't go back to it. So make sure you say everything that you want to say right away. So you submit question 1, it's completed. The second exam question is going to pop up. And then you're going to have a timer that will show for 20 minutes. So it looks like you have a long free response, then you have a shorter free response. They say that once that 20-minute timer starts, you take 15 minutes to read the question, you work on your response on your scrap paper and your cheat sheets or your review books, whatever you're using along the way. While it is an open note type of exam, you don't really have all the time in the world to go searching through, your textbook. So you really should have your cheat sheets, kind of consolidated maybe into 1 or 2 pieces of paper with all of the graphs and models on them for each exam. So 15 minutes, you work on that second question, you submit it in that final 5 minutes. Timer's going to give you an alert, you stop working, you submit your response. Seems pretty simple, right? All right, so let's keep going here with the macro stuff. So on exam day, you'll have your e-ticket email. There's a checklist that you can check out on your own with your AP ID. Make sure that all of this works with your Wi-Fi, your laptop, or if you're doing it from your phone. They say they recommend Chrome for this, but Firefox, Safari, Edge will also work. That's pretty much it. They recommend scrap paper. Obviously, that's my #1 recommendation, other than the actual device, is having a scrap paper on top of your class notes or study guides or cheat sheets that you make for yourself. They say you can now use a calculator. That's new. I used to have students that really struggled with the basic addition, subtraction, and multiplication, a little bit of division that pops up on the AP exams, but now they're letting you use the calculator. So, word, good for you. All right, so you got that first question, 25 minutes. 20 minutes to work it out, 5 minutes to submit. So here that they tell us, blah, blah, blah. Say question 1 is equivalent to a combination of two short questions like FRQ2 and FRQ3. That's 55% of the exam weight. And then they say question 2 draws on the same skills as traditional AP exams, yada, yada, yada. They say this one's kind of like the long free response question, which was typically the FRQ number 1. That's an interesting reversal there. Right, so looking at 2 questions. Nice short exam. Like I said, to me it looks like just a watered down free response set. You don't even have to worry about the multiple choice questions. Right, so let's look at the sample questions that the College Board had put out for the macro test. Boom. Right, so the 2020 exam sample questions that they had listed here, they're drawing this, here they go, blah, blah, blah. They say the questions are from the 2011 and 2003 AP macro exams. Okay, interesting that they chose those 2 years. All right, so you have 2 short questions. So question number 1. Question number 1 is a GDP type question. Now, I'm going to just kind of walk through how to do it for now, but I want you to do this on your own, and then as part of this week's assignments, and then we will check our answers up against the key. So here they give us 2009 food, clothes, and entertainment, and 2010 food, clothes, and entertainment. So the output, they're giving us the quantity, which is the output, and they're giving us the prices for those corresponding years. They tell us that 2009 is the base year here. So assume that 2009 is the base year. Calculate nominal gross domestic product, which means you use 2010 prices in the calculation. Then they say calculate the real GDP. So this is fun. It says note for sample question. This question is from a past AP exam in which showing work was not required. On this year's exam, students will be expected to show their work on any calculation questions. So to calculate real GDP, dig back into your notes. This has been Noble too. You take the nominal GDP, you divide it by a GDP deflator. But in this case, when they're giving you very simple numbers to work with, just a simplified economy, a few goods and services being produced, to get the real GDP in 2010, you just take the output, the quantities that are being produced in 2010, and you put it in 2009 prices, which they give you there on the chart. The price of food, price of clothes, price of entertainment, 2009. Multiply that by the 2010 quantities and you add them up. C says if in one year the price index is 50 and the next year the price index is 55, what is the rate of inflation? So this is a mathy type question where it's cool that you use the calculator. This is just a percent change question. You take the new minus old divided by the old and you multiply by 100. Remember, current minus initial over initial times 100. It's a percent change formula that you just use in life, not even economic specific. So the rate of inflation from one year to the next, new minus old over old times 100, something we talked about back in Noble 2. So this is pretty much a Noble 2 question that you see here. D, assume next year's wage rate will be 3% higher than this year's because of inflation expectations. So the actual inflation rate is 4% at the beginning of next year. The real wage will be higher, lower, or the same today. So think about the Fisher equation response here. When you think about nominal wages versus real wages relative to the inflation rate. So Fisher equation, again, Noble 2. E says assume that Sarah gets a fixed rate loan from a bank when the expected inflation rate is 3%. I gave you a question just like this on that actual exam, which is kind of cool. When we took that second test this year, assume Sarah gets a fixed rate loan from a bank when expected inflation is 3%. If the actual inflation rate turns out to be 4%, who benefits? So in real terms, you want to work this out. So if you think about the Fisher equation, real is equal to the nominal minus the inflation rate. Now, when it comes to unanticipated or unexpected inflation, just use the basic rules that we had talked about in Noble 2. People that receive fixed payments, they're going to be the losers of unanticipated inflation, and people that make fixed payments are going to gain from unanticipated inflation. So you have to figure out what the situation is here. Who gains and who loses? So they say that's a 25-minute question. I don't know how long I just kind of went over how I would tackle it, but this is all Noble 2. And they say it's similar to like a question 2 and 3 combined on a traditional FRQ set. There you go, no graphs here to work with, and just a couple formulas. All right. Oops, might be is a little bit more here for that first question. Second part of the question, they just combine it with a comparative and absolute advantage type question. So now this goes back to Noble 1, when we had the two economies, Surf Kingdom and Sandlands, and they were producing ice cream cones and beach balls. This is the same thing. Make yourself a chart on your paper. You sketch it out on your paper. You have Ashna, you have Luna, the two goods that they're producing, food and machines. These production possibility curves that you see, they got the straight line, so it's constant opportunity cost. You look at the two extremes. Food, is 40 for Ashna, 40 for Luna, 30 for Ashna, and Luna can produce 40 machines if they put all their resources into machine production. Ashna can produce 10 machines if they put all their resources into machine production. To get the opportunity cost, this is an output problem. So if you need the opportunity cost of machines, go food divided by machines. If we need the opportunity cost of food, make food the denominator. It's machines divided by food, using the two extremes. So you walk through the parts of the question. F says which country has an absolute advantage in the production of machines. You're just looking at who can produce more. That's how absolute advantage works. It's so simple. Again, this is going back to Noble 1. G, same thing, absolute advantage, but that's for food. Part H, it says which country has the comparative advantage in the production of machines. So now you're using the opportunity cost. So lower relative opportunity cost, that is comparative advantage. So you should, like I said, create your chart on your scrap paper, the same chart that we did in Noble 1. Your two economies, the two goods, the output that they can produce, and the opportunity costs. So just like we did in class, just like you did in Noble 1. Right, cool. With trade between these two countries, which country will import food? Okay, so which country will import food? Well, that's the same country that is exporting machines if trade is to occur. So whoever has the comparative advantage in machine production, that's the economy that will import food. So give an example of terms of trade that's acceptable to both countries. So this is the I over E rule. If the ratio of imports divided by exports is greater than the opportunity cost of what that country is exporting, then it's a good trade. So you just have to pick two values that work out for both. Would that be a 1-for-1 trade? Is it a 1-for-2 trade? Is it a 1-for-3 trade? Again, that's going to be based on your charts for Ashna and Luna that you made with the opportunity costs. All right, so that's your 25-minute question. A little bit from Noble 2, a little bit from Noble 1. All right, then the sample question number 2. This is the long question. This is like what they would consider to be question 1 on the traditional FRQ set. So this is the 2002 AP Macro exam, says it's taken from. All right, so it says using correctly labeled AS and AD graph, show how the impact of a sudden large decrease in private investment spending affects output and the price level. And again, you don't have to submit the ADAS drawing, but you should be sketching it out on your scrap paper, and then you're just going to explain the effects of what you just sketched out. So you have ADAS. Now, let's see, they don't even tell us here where the economy is operating. It just says that there's a sudden decrease in private investment, which is gross investment expenditures. So, I mean, if they don't tell you if the economy was in recession, inflation, or fully employed, you can just do a quick sketch of a fully employed economy would be perfectly fine here. The key here, they're talking about investment spending. So the question you ask yourself, is this going to affect aggregate demand or aggregate supply? Anytime spending pops up in the model, it's aggregate demand. So less investment spending, that's less aggregate demand. Now, I'm only going to help you out with this part here because I know a student had asked, to be more thorough with explanations. They're not asking you to be very thorough here. So they're saying, what's the effect on the output? Okay, here's your explanation. If there's a decrease in investment spending, aggregate demand is going to decrease. Aggregate demand shifts to the left. If there's a leftward shift of aggregate demand, real GDP, or in this case, output, decreases. That's the explanation. It's exactly what the graph is showing, but you don't have to submit the graph. You just have to submit your explanation of the model. So decreased aggregate demand means less spending, so less output is produced. So B, what happens to the price level? Well, duh, when aggregate demand shifts to the left, your new equilibrium point should have a lower price level. That's it. And then C, based on the change in output, what happens to employment? Be careful with these types of questions, not because they're hard, because sometimes they ask about employment and sometimes they ask about unemployment. So you have to make sure you go in the right direction. So based on part A, the output, so output decreases, so that means there's less employment, or there's more, or an increase, more unemployment. So just make sure you phrase that correctly. Cool? Cool. All right, so the next part, they just go into the policy effects in the ADAS model. So here they're talking about fiscal policy. So they're saying you identify the fiscal policy. So you're going to identify the fiscal policy. Your identification is going to be something that has to do with income taxes or government spending. That's fiscal policy. That's up to you to know. And then how does that policy affect aggregate demand, output, and real interest rates in the short run? Right, so aggregate demand, if you're looking to offset the effects of the decrease in investment, you want to do something that has to do with expansionary fiscal policy, and then explain aggregate demand, which way it shifts. Based on the shift, what happens to output and price level? That's it. It's barely a sentence that they're asking for here. The part you need to be careful with answering this question, this is from Noble 5, has to do with the real interest rates. So here they're testing about the loanable funds market, and this ties into that crowding out effect. So when we talk about fiscal policy and have an expansionary fiscal policy, they mean that the government's going to run a budget deficit, which means it increases its demand for loanable funds, so it's borrowing more, and then based on that shift, what happens to real interest rates? I don't want to give away all the answers because you're going to do this yourself. The next part has to do with open market operations. So now it's monetary policy. It's the central bank. So to offset the decrease in investment, so the counter-cyclical monetary policy here, so this is all based on the Keynesian transmission mechanism monetary policy. Open market operations, is it easy money or is it tight money? Expansionary or contractionary monetary policy? This is Noble 4. Noble 4, yo. Okay, I'll tell you. To expand the money supply, because we're looking to increase aggregate demand, then you're talking about buying bonds on the open market. Make sure you get that correct, because I have a feeling that's going to come into play on the exam. They always try to see if students understand, when the central bank buys securities, that expands the money supply, and then when the central bank sells securities, that tightens the money supply and then negatively affects aggregate demand. But the central bank obviously targets interest rates. Nominal interest rates and real interest rates are going to move in the same direction. Again, this ties into Noble 4. When the Fed or the central bank buys the bonds, that increases the excess reserves. It increases the supply of money. Nominal interest rates are going to decrease. That means there's more consumption, there's more investment, so aggregate demand is going to shift to the right, and then you explain the effects on output and price level. And then as that price level comes up, the real interest rates are also going to come down. So nominal interest rates and real interest rates will move in the same direction when it comes to expansionary monetary policy. All right, next part. If the central bank continues the open market operation, what are the long run effects in each of the following? So in terms of inflation, all right, so based on the change in the price level from both of those policies, looks like they're asking about self-correction here. So if it changes inflation expectations, whenever you see long-run effects, they're talking about self-correction, classical model, Noble 3. If these policies, if that open market operation causes inflation expectations might rise. You have to figure out how that affects the short-run aggregate supply curve, and then how that would affect inflation over the long run. And then here it says, don't worry about K because there's no foreign exchange markets. Couldn't be asked on this year's exam. No Unit 6, but you do know it. That's kind of cool. I think I have a feeling that they want you to say, based on the change in the interest rate, how does that affect foreign demand for the country's assets? But no worries. All right, so that is the 2020 exam format. Like I said, it's like a watered down exam. Other maybe possibilities in terms of question choice might be an explanation of the Phillips curves. I don't really see the Phillips curve mentioned here much. Maybe they'll ask something about a money multiplier calculation or spending multiplier calculation, which I didn't really see mentioned here. That's pretty much it. All right, so I want you to do this practice set, and you're going to submit this practice set and check your answers for this week's assignment. Hope that was helpful.